The Gumleaf War by Paul Jennings. The park ranger looked out of the train window and said, "It's a hot summer. We'll have bushfires this year for sure." No one in the carriage answered him. They were all too busy looking at me and my nose. They weren't looking straight at me. They were straining their eyeballs, trying to look out of the corner of their eyes. I didn't pay any attention to them. They wanted to be sticky beaks, that was their business, and there was nothing that I could do about it. I was used to people staring at me, but it still made me a bit embarrassed. After all, I couldn't help it. I didn't ask to have the longest nose in the world. It happened by accident, and it wasn't my fault. Actually, I'd only had the nose for 3 months, but 3 months is a long time when your nose has been stretched to 17 centimeters long. Every day is filled with humiliation and pain because of people staring and smiling to themselves. It all started one night when I went down to the kitchen to get myself a snack from the pantry. Dad and Mum were asleep, so I crept down the stairs as quietly as I could. The pantry had 2 swinging doors which closed in the middle. I opened them a few centimeters and poked my nose through, looking at all the goodies within. Suddenly someone pushed me from behind and I fell onto the doors, slamming them shut. The only problem was my nose was stuck in between them. The pain was terrible and there was blood everywhere. My screaming just about brought the house down, and Dad and Mum rushed into the kitchen. Dad shoved me in the car and raced me off to hospital, while Mum stayed home and told my little brother off for pushing me in the back and causing all the trouble. The damage to my nose was monstrous. It was stretched from its normal 3 centimeters to 7. It stuck out on the front of my face like a bonnet of a car in front of the windscreen. I could see my nose quite clearly without even using a mirror or going cross-eyed. And to make matters worse, the doctor said nothing could be done for another 3 years when I'd stopped growing. They weren't willing to operate on it for a whole 3 years. 3 years of walking around with my personal flagpole. I felt ill at the thought of it. I only lasted 1 day back at school. Most of the kids were pretty good about it. They tried not to stare at me and only peered at my nose when they thought that I couldn't see them. But people have to look at you when you talk, and I could see some of them were having a really hard time just not cracking up laughing. And then there were those who were downright mean. One girl made a smart remark about the only boy in the world who had to blow his nose with a bedsheet. When I got home from school, I gave it to Mum straight. "I'm not going back to school," I said. "No way. I've finished with school for 3 years. I'm not going to be the laughingstock of the high school." Mum and Dad tried everything to get me back at school. They tried bribes. I wouldn't take them. Dad lifted me into the car, dumped me at the school gate, but I just walked home again. They brought in a psychologist. Nice bloke who spent hours and hours talking to me, but nothing worked. In the end, they decided to send me for a holiday with my grandfather McFuddy, who lived all alone in a shack high in the mountains. They thought a spell in the country might bring me back to my senses. So there I was, sitting in the train on the way to Grandfather McFuddy's, with a carriage load of people staring at me out of the corner of their eyes. Besides the ranger, there was a clergyman with a white dog collar around his neck, an old woman about 35, and a girl about my age. The girl was biting her tongue, trying to stop herself from laughing at my nose. In fact, I think the only passenger who wasn't interested in my nose was the park ranger. He just kept mumbling to himself about how dry it was and how there was going to be bad bushfires this year. Grandfather McFuddy was waiting for me at the station with a horse and trap. A horse and trap that gave me a surprise for a start. Didn't think anyone drove around in a horse and trap anymore, but that was nothing compared to what was to come. Grandfather McFuddy turned out to be the strangest old boy I'd ever met. He was dressed in dirty trousers held up with a scungy pair of braces. He had a blue singlet and a battered old hat which was pulled down over his whiskery face. His false teeth were broken and covered in brown tobacco stains. He cleared his throat, spat on the ground. "Get up here, boy," he said. "We have to get back before dark." I don't know how Grandfather McFuddy recognized me because I'd never met him before. I guess he recognized my nose from Mum's letters or something. We rattled along the dusty road which wound its way through the still gum forest. "Thanks for having me for a holiday, Grandfather," I said. Grandfather just grunted and said, "Call me McFuddy." He wasn't a great one for talking. I told him all about my nose and what had happened at school, but he made no comment. Every now and then he would cough terribly and spit on the ground. He was a fantastic spitter. He could set a gobby at least 4 meters. A couple of times he stopped the horse and rolled himself a cigarette. After a while the trees turned into paddocks and the road started to wind its way upwards. There was only one house, if you call it a house, on the whole road. It was really a tumble-down old shack with a rusty iron roof and rickety porch. McFuddy stopped the cart before we reached the shack. "Cover your ears, boy," he said to me. "What?" I asked. "Block your ears. Put your hands over your ears while we go past Foxy's place," he yelled. "Why?" I wanted to know. "Because I say so," said McFuddy. He put his hand in his pocket, fished out a dirty wad of cotton wool. He tore off 2 pieces and stuffed them in his ears. Then we went slowly past the old shack, me with my hands over my ears and McFuddy with cotton wool sticking out of his. The horse was the only one of us who could hear. An old man ran out onto the porch of the shack and started shaking his fist at us. He was mad about something, but I didn't know what. I was shocked to see the old man had cotton wool in his ears as well. There was one thing for sure, I told myself. This was going to be a very strange holiday. McFuddy stood up in the cart and started shaking his fist back at the other old man. Then he sat down and drove on, grumbling and mumbling under his breath. I looked around at the shack to see what the angry old man was doing. All I could see was the top of his bald head. He was bending over, peering through a telescope set up on the porch. It was pointed at another old shack, higher up on the mountain. "He's looking at my place," said McFuddy. "That's my place up there." My heart sank. Even though McFuddy's shack was about 1 kilometre away, I could see it was a ramshackle, neglected heap. There were rusty cars, old fridges and rubbish all around it. Weatherboards were falling off, and the last flake of paint must have peeled off about 100 years ago. We went inside the shack, and McFuddy showed me my room. It was the washroom. It had a broken mangle and an empty trough. On the floor was a dusty striped mattress and an old grey blanket. The whole place was covered in cobwebs, and the windows were filthy and dirty. In the kitchen I noticed a telescope pointing out of the window. A little patch had been cleaned on the window pane to allow the telescope to be aimed down the hill at Foxy's shack. "I'm going to put some fence posts on the top paddock," said McFuddy. "You can have a look around yourself if you want, boy, but just don't go near Foxy's place. And don't get lost." He went out into the hot afternoon sun, banging the door behind him. I wandered around McFuddy's farm, but didn't take long. Then decided to go and explore the small forest further up the hill. Saw a small brown snake and a couple of lizards, but not much else. In the distance I could hear McFuddy banging away at his fence posts. Then I heard something quite strange. It was music. Someone was playing a tune, but I couldn't work out what sort of instrument it was. Then it came to me. It was a gum leaf. Someone was playing Click Go the Shears on a gum leaf. I sat down on a log and listened. It was wonderful listening to such a good player. The tune wafted through the silent gum trees like a lazy bee. I strained my ears to see who it was, but I couldn't see anyone. Then I suddenly felt a pain in my left hand. I looked down and saw a deep scratch. I was bleeding badly. I wondered how I'd done it. Thought I must have scratched it on a branch. Forgot all about the music and ran back to the shack as fast as I could. McFuddy was sitting in the kitchen having a cup of tea. He was angry as a snake when he saw the cut. "How'd you do it?" he yelled. "I don't know," I answered. "I just noticed it when I was sitting on a log." "Was there music?" he shouted. "Did you hear music?" "Yes, someone was playing a gum leaf. A good player, too." McFuddy went red in the face. "They were playing Click Go the Shears, weren't they?" he said. I nodded. He jumped out of his chair and ran over to the wall and took down a shotgun. "That rat Foxy," he spluttered. "I'll get him for this. I'll fix him good." He ran over to the door and fired both barrels of the shotgun, somewhere in the direction of Foxy's shack. It went off with a terrific bang that rattled the windows. I ran outside and looked down the mountainside. Far below, I could see Foxy's shack. A tiny figure was standing on the porch and pointing something up at us. It was a small flash, and the dull sound of another shotgun blast echoed up through the hills. "Missed," said McFuddy. "Missed by a mile." He went back in the kitchen, chuckling to himself. I wasn't surprised that Foxy had missed. I wasn't surprised that either of them had missed. Shotguns aren't meant to be used over long distance. There was no way they could have hit each other. "What's going on?" I asked. "Foxy didn't give me the scratch. There was no one near me at all. I didn't see one person the whole time I was out. It wasn't his fault, it was an accident." McFuddy didn't answer for a while. He was eating a great slab of bread covered in blackberry jam, pushed his false teeth between his lips, fished around under them with his tongue, cleaning out the blackberry seeds. When he had finished, he said, "Don't get yourself into something you don't understand. Foxy is lower than a snake's armpit. He caused that cut, and that's that." "But," I began. "No buts, and don't go wandering off again without my permission." And that was the end of the discussion. He just wouldn't say any more about it. That night I went to bed on the old mattress, tossed and turned for a while, but at last I went off to sleep. In the morning, McFuddy had a terrible cold. He was coughing and sneezing and spitting all the time. His nose was as red as a tomato. He was in a bad temper. "Foxy's been here," he yelled. "He's given me the flu. He came when I was in bed, and I couldn't get out quick enough. Didn't you hear it, boy? Didn't you hear the gum leaf playing?" "No," I said. "And I don't believe Foxy gave you the flu. You can't catch colds through closed windows." I walked out of the front door to get away from his coughing. That's when I saw the note. A crumpled, dirty envelope that was lying on the porch. It said, "To the boy with the long nose." I tore it open. Inside was a message for me. "Sorry about the scratch, boy. I thought you was McFuddy." McFuddy tore the note out of my hand. "I knew it. I just knew it," he spluttered. "That low-down ratbag up here last night, he came and gave me the rotten flu." He ran inside and came out with a shotgun again. Once again he fired off both barrels down at Foxy's shack. The shot was answered straight away by another dull bang from Foxy in the valley below. I tried to get McFuddy to explain what was going on, but he was in a bad mood and wouldn't say anything about it. "Straining a fence today," he said, "and I need your help. Grab one end of that corner post and we'll take it down to the bottom paddock." We staggered down the hillside with a heavy post. I was surprised how strong McFuddy was. He didn't stop once, but he coughed and spat the whole way. Then, just as we neared the fence line, McFuddy stepped in a pat of fresh cow dung and slipped over. "Ugh!" he screamed. "My ankle! My ankle!" I rushed over to him and looked at his ankle. It was already starting to swell and turn blue. "I'll help you back to the house," I said. "This looks serious." I looked at his face. It was all screwed up in pain. Then suddenly a change swept over him, and he grinned. "Good," he said. "Hurts like the dickens. Just what I wanted." He started to cackle like a chook that had just laid an egg. "Go get me stick, boy. It's the best thing that's happened for a long while." I found him a stick, and he used it to help him hobble off the road. He limped badly, and I could see his ankle was hurting. "Where are you going?" I asked him. "Can't go off down the road with that ankle." "I'm going to the old twisted gum," he called back over his shoulder. "And then I've some other business. You can go back to the house, boy, and don't you try follow me." He limped slowly down the road and finally disappeared around a bend. The whole thing was crazy. These two old men shooting at each other and blaming each other for things they couldn't have done. Sneaking around playing tunes on gum leaf in the middle of the night. I had to find out what was going on. So I followed McFuddy down the road, making sure I kept behind in bushes and things and where he couldn't see me. I found it easy to keep up with him because he went so slowly on account of his twisted ankle. After about an hour he reached the old twisted gum he'd pointed out to me the day before. I noticed all of the lower branches were stripped bare of leaves, as if stock had been grazing on them. McFuddy hit a branch with his stick, and a leaf fell off. He put it to his lips and blew. A strong, musical note floated up the road. McFuddy laughed to himself and put the leaf in his pocket. Then he headed off down the road. I knew where he was going. Sure enough, after about another hour of hobbling, McFuddy reached Foxy's shack. Foxy was peering into his telescope, which pointed at our place. McFuddy crept on all fours along a row of bushes so he couldn't be seen. When he was quite close to the shack, but still out of sight, he grabbed the gum leaf and started to play a tune. I couldn't hear what it was because a strong wind was blowing. I found out later it was Click Go the Shears. Soon as the first few notes sounded, Foxy jumped up in the air as if he had been bitten. Then he clapped his hands over his ears and ran inside screaming at the top of his voice. McFuddy turned and ran for it. He bolted out to the road like a rabbit. I'd never seen him move so fast. It took me a few seconds to realize he wasn't limping. His sprained ankle was cured. It wasn't swollen, and it didn't hurt. Foxy came out onto the porch carrying a shotgun, which he fired into the air over McFuddy's head. "You're gone, McFuddy," he shouted. "I'll have you for goanna oil." He tried to chase McFuddy up the road, but he couldn't. He had a sprained ankle. My head started to spin. This was the weirdest thing I'd ever come across. These two old men seemed to be able to give each other their illnesses and cure themselves at the same time. By blowing a gum leaf where the other person could hear it, I decided to find out what was going on, and I followed McFuddy up the dusty winding road. I caught up to him under the old twisted gum tree, where he was sitting down for a rest. He was laughing to himself in his raspy voice. I could see what he'd thought he'd had a great victory or something. "That's fixed him," he said. "That'll slow him down for a bit." McFuddy didn't seem to care about me following him. In fact, he seemed pleased to have someone to show off to. "What happened to your sprained ankle?" I demanded. "How come Foxy's got one now, and he didn't before?" McFuddy looked at me for a bit, and then he said, "You might as well know the truth, boy. After all, you're family. It's this tree, this old twisted gum tree. When you play Click Go the Shears on one of its leaves, it passes your illness on to whoever hears it. But it only works for leaves from this tree, and only the tune that makes it work is Click Go the Shears." It seemed too fantastic to believe, but I had seen it work with my own eyes. "Why does it only work with leaves from this old twisted gum tree?" I asked. "Don't know," he said. "Tried it with hundreds of other trees, but it never works. It only works with this tree." He gave us an enormous sneeze and spat on the road. His nose was still red and his eyes were watering. "How come you still got your cold?" I asked. "Why didn't Foxy get that back just now when you passed on the sprained ankle?" "You can't get it back again. Same thing can only be passed on once. After that, you're stuck with it. And I'll just have to wait for the cold to go away on its own. Foxy can't give me the sprained ankle back. He'll have to wait for it to get better in the normal way. That's the way it works." McFuddy took the gum leaf out of his pocket and threw it on the ground. I picked it up and tried to make a noise. Nothing came out. Not a peep. "Save your breath, boy," said McFuddy. "Each leaf only plays once. After that, it doesn't work anymore." "Well, I think it's the meanest thing I've ever heard of," I said. "Fancy making another person sick on purpose. How long has this been going on?" "Over 60 years, boy, and it's not my fault. Foxy first gave me the measles when we were at school. But I found out, and I gave him a toothache back. That's how it all got started, and it's been going on ever—" McFuddy stopped in mid-sentence. He was twisting up his nose and sniffing the hot north wind. "Smoke!" he yelled. "I can smell smoke." He jumped up and started running up the road. "Quick, boy," he called out over his shoulder. "There's a bushfire coming. Back to the house." We both sped up the road as fast as we could go. We were only just in time. A savage fire swept over the top of the hill and raced through the dry grass towards the shack. Smoke swirled overhead and blocked out the sun. "Get up on the roof, boy," McFuddy yelled. "Block up the downpipes and fill up the spouting with water. I'll close up the house." I put a ladder up against the wall and filled up the spouting with buckets of water. McFuddy went around closing all the windows and doors. Then he started up a portable generator and started spraying the house with a hosepipe connected to his water tank. Soon, the house was almost surrounded by fire. Sparks and smoke swirled everywhere. Spot fires broke out in the front yard and at the back of the house. Then the back door caught on fire. I beat at it with a Hessian bag that I had soaked in water, but it was getting away from me. McFuddy couldn't help. He was fighting a fire that had broken out under the front porch. It looked hopeless. I couldn't hold the fire back at the back door, and I knew at any moment the whole house would explode into a mass of flames. Then, without warning, an old Holden ute sped through the front gate and stopped in a swirl of dust. It was Foxy. He jumped out of the car, put on a backpack spray, and rushed over to the back door. He soon had the flames out. Then he ran round to the front and started helping McFuddy on the porch. The three of us fought the flames side by side for 2 hours until the worst of it had passed. Then we just stood there, looking at the shack, which had been saved with Foxy's help, the burnt grass and trees which surrounded us. The shack was saved, but it was surrounded by a desert of smouldering blackness. McFuddy looked at his old enemy, who was still limping when he walked. He held out his hand. "Thanks, mate. Thanks a lot." Foxy paused for a second. Then he shook the outstretched hand. "It's okay, McFuddy," he answered. "Would have done the same for a wombat." McFuddy grinned. "Come over and have a beer. You've earned it." They both went into the kitchen, and McFuddy opened 2 stubbies and a can of Fanta for me. They were soon joking and laughing and talking about what a close shave it had been. "Glad to see your friends at last," I said after a while. "Now neither of you will have to visit the old twisted gum again." They both sprang to their feet as if someone had struck a pin in them. "The old twisted gum!" they shouted together. Both of them ran outside, jumped into the ute, only just had time to climb into the back before it lurched down the hill. I hung on for grim death and stared at the blackened, leafless trees that sped by us on either side. We screeched to a halt, and we all climbed out. I was pleased to see the old twisted gum had been burnt in the fire. It was a black and twisted corpse. The leaves had all gone up in smoke, except one, high on the top, well out of reach. One lonely green leaf pointed at the sky. We all stood there looking at it and saying nothing. Then, without a word, Foxy ran over to the ute and drove off down the hill as fast as he could go. "Quick!" shouted McFuddy. "He's gone to get a ladder. Come help me, boy. We've got to get that leaf before he does. It's the last one. Come and help me carry the ladder." "No way," I said. "I wish every leaf had been burnt. Passing on your sickness to someone else is a terrible thing to do. Carry your own ladder." "Traitor!" he yelled as he hurried off. I sat there beside the blackened countryside, looking up at the leaf. It was too high up for me to climb and get it anyway, and the tree was still hot and smouldering, so I just sat there and waited. I'd been sitting there for quite some time when something happened. The leaf fell from its lonely perch and slowly fluttered to the ground. It landed right at my feet. I picked it up, put it in my pocket. It was only just in time. At that very moment, McFuddy and Foxy arrived carrying a ladder each. Foxy's car had conked out from overheating, and both men were staggering under their heavy burdens. They dumped their ladders down and stared at the tree with their mouths open. Then they fell onto their hands and knees, started scrabbling around in the burnt debris at the bottom of the tree. "The last leaf," moaned Foxy. "The very last leaf." "Gone, gone," cried McFuddy. They scratched and searched everywhere, but to no avail. They both became covered in black soot and dust. They looked like 2 black ghosts hunting around in a black forest. After a while they slowed down in their search. McFuddy looked at me. "The boy," he said suddenly. "The boy's got it. Give it here, boy." They both started walking towards me slowly with outstretched hands. Their eyes were wild circles of white set in their black faces. They looked mean, real mean. I felt like a rabbit trapped by 2 starving dingoes. I could see they could tear me to pieces just to get their leaf. I pushed it deeper into my pocket and ran away. I had to get rid of it. I wasn't going to give either of them the chance to get one last shot at each other, but I didn't know what to do. I was cornered. One of them was coming from each direction on the road, and the paddocks were still hot and smouldering. I remembered what McFuddy had told me. Each leaf would only play one tune, and I wouldn't work anymore. I decided to use its power up by playing it. I put it to my lips and blew, but nothing happened. Not a squeak. I tried again, and a loud blurp came out. It was working. I tried to think of a tune to play, but my mind was blank. I was so nervous I couldn't think of one single tune, except Click Go the Shears. So that's what I played. And it wasn't very good. There were lots of blurps and wrong notes and things, but it was Click Go the Shears. No worries. McFuddy and Foxy fell to the ground screaming with their hands up over their ears. Then they put their hands over their noses, and so did I. My nose was normal. It had gone back to 3 centimeters long, and McFuddy and Foxy both had long, long noses. They both copped my poor, broken, stretched nose, and mine was normal again. McFuddy looked at Foxy's noses and started to laugh. He rolled around in the dirt laughing until tears made little tracks through the soot on his face. Then Foxy saw McFuddy's nose, and he started to laugh soon. Soon all of us were rolling around in the dirt, shaking with laughter. McFuddy and Foxy didn't seem to mind their long noses, and they made friends again once they realized there were no leaves left. I explained that both of them could have operations to shorten their noses, but neither of them seemed very interested. "Not trying to impress girls at my age," said McFuddy. Next day I got on the train to go home. I wanted to get back to school again now I had a normal nose. It was a short holiday, but it turned out to be a good one. So there I was sitting on the train with the same people that I'd arrived with. They were all staring at me out of the corners of their eyes, trying to work out if I was that funny-looking kid they travelled with before. The ranger was the only one not taking any notice of me. He was staring out the window at the blackened forest. No one was listening except me, and I didn't like what he was saying. "Never mind," he rambled on. "It'll be green again this time next year. Gum trees usually spring back to life after a bushfire."